All right, Med 111 A&P. Just a quick announcement. The Bulldog Bulletin. Have you guys had a chance to take a look at it? So the first thing they're looking for is a VA work study. So if you're a VA student and you want to be employed here, they'll gladly accept you. They're also looking for tutors, so student tutors as well. So you guys know who our tutor is, right? For MS, it's Michelle. So I'll put her information on the board, and you guys can contact her if you guys need a tutor. Let's see what else. They had TED Talks with the campus president. I guess they had those recorded. Career Services says hello. Do you guys know your Career Services team? Sorta, kinda. You guys know where they sit in the campus? So they're right out in front, first people you see on those doors. So get to know them. Start your resume now. That way they can help you instead of waiting to the end. Certifications. Are you guys planning on taking certs? So as you qualify, do the review, take the cert. The reviews are usually week 3, and then Eddie, your dean will let you know if you qualify. And then usually the exam is in week 4, and they're both on Fridays. So this is a list of those who achieved their certs. And lastly, formerly the Healthcare and Leadership Club, they changed their name to the Student Ambassadors. So if you guys want to join that group, it's available. They brought to you the healthcare t-shirts. So you guys know on Wednesday, you guys can wear your t-shirts. Do you guys get yours yet? You guys got yours? And then if you're a veteran, you're supposed to get another one as well. All right, let's begin. All right, the human body is pretty complex, but at the end of Med 111 and Med 200, you should be an expert in A&P. So we'll start from the chemical all the way down, or all the way up to the entire organism level. Don't get too scared with the terminology. If you learn medical terminology based on the word roots, prefix, and suffix, it'll make it a lot easier than trying to memorize every new term you come across. Ana means together. What does tome mean? So this is kind of an outdated term for the structure of the body, because when they used to study the body, it was a dead body and all the fluids were drained, so they're actually just cutting it up. So the term kind of stays. So this is just what it is, what it is and where it is in the body. Physiology, now that's what it does, the function of the body part. And a lot of times the structure will determine the function. For example, the bladder is pretty much an empty container. So its structure is a container, its function, hold urine. Homeostasis. So homo means the same, stasis means to stop. So we want your body to maintain the same. So maintain the same temperature, maintain the same blood pressure, right? Maintain everything pretty much the same in the body at all times. So homeostasis. All right. Levels of organization. So we have atoms. So they're the smallest substance. And below atom are the subatomic particles. So sub means under or below. So we have electron. What's the charge on an electron? Yeah, negative charge. Then we have a proton. What's the charge on a proton. P for positive, and then you have a neutron, which is neutral, right? There's no charge on it. So those are the three subatomic particles, and we won't get any smaller than that. So those three together will make your atoms. And when you have atoms combining together, different atoms, they'll make molecules. So for example, carbon to an oxygen, right? So these atoms come together in complex molecules that will form structures within the cells. So these are the organs of the cell. So an example, the nucleus, that's an organ. Mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, those are all organs of the cell. So those organs of the cell will combine together and make the smallest living unit, which is the cell. So if cells perform the same tasks, then they are a tissue type. And we only have 4 tissue types in our body. And we'll go over the 4 different tissue types. So tissue is just cells that kind of do the same thing. So if my cells filter, right, then it might work in the kidneys. Right? So if I have different types of tissues, like I have one that's a filter, one that's a container type of tissue, then that'll make my organ. So different tissue types working together will make your organ. Multiple organs working together, you have an organ system. So in your urinary system, you have the bladder, the kidneys, the ureters, the urethra, and then the multiple 13 organ systems combined together will make the complete organism. So make sure you're able to trace from smallest to largest level of organization. All right, 4 tissue types. So we have epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Right? So muscles you guys are familiar with, nerves I'm pretty much you guys are familiar with, epithelial and connective tissue probably not so much. So epi means above. So for example, the covering, all of your skin and the skin structures and organs are epithelial tissue. Also lining the inside of your GI tract, that also creates a border. So that is also epithelial tissue, your entire GI tract. The skin organs like sweat glands, exocrine is an example. And endocrine glands, these are your hormones. Right? Those are all part of epithelial tissue. Right? So here you can see an example. So this is where the cells are dividing and they're being pushed up and out. And these these cells happen to have little hairs that line the top of them. So if these are in your respiratory tract, they would continually sweep that mucus and anything that's trapped up and out. So epithelial tissue creates a border, and they also secrete mucus, sweat, and hormones. Avascular. A is without. So without any blood vessel. So the top layer of skin, there is no blood supply. So all the nutrients just leak up, and then any toxins are excreted through the skin. All right, next is connective tissue. So we had epithelial, muscle, nerves, and then connective tissue. So now that you have an understanding what epithelial is, just think of skin and GI tract. Muscles, we'll talk about the 3 types. And then nervous system, pretty easy, all your nerves. So if it doesn't belong in any of those 3 categories that you're familiar with, then it's going to be connective tissue. So process of elimination. If it isn't skin or the GI tract, muscles or nerves, it's connective tissue. So it's the matrix. So bone is both living and dead. The living portion produces the matrix. This is the soft part in the bone. The hard part, that's the dead part of bone. Rich in blood supply, because the cells need the nutrients to create the matrix, right? Create all of the tissue, right? So fibroblasts, these are cells that create the fibers. Just imagine chewing a piece of beef jerky, right? And then you're chewing forever, but it's still not gone, right? These cells are laying down all that fibrous material, holding the muscle together. Blood is connective tissue, right? So it connects oxygen from the lungs to the rest of the body, takes waste, sends it to the kidneys and liver. Bone is connective tissue as well. So living portion and a mineral salt. So that's the dead portion. So the calcium and phosphorus. The living bone, they create all of the proteins that makes up the cartilage and the bone matrix. So bone is alive. It's being rebuilt all the time, broken down and rebuilt all the time. So cartilage. So there's cells that create the cartilage. So they live in their little hole and they'll secrete all of the fibers that create cartilage. So the dark dots, those are the actual cell nucleus, right? Those are the actual cells. And they're laying down all this fibrous material, all the protein, collagen, elastin, and this will eventually become bone. If it's ossified, it'll become bone. Things connecting your bones together, so like sinew, soft but strong. Example are your tendons, right? They're soft, they're pliable, but they're super strong, right? You can carry a lot of weight when you activate them. Adipose is another term for fat. Cyte, anytime you see that, that just means cell. So adipose, adipocyte, that's just a fat cell. Stores energy, cushions, and retains heat. So a lot of different types of connective tissue. It could be dense, it could be loose, it could be blood, which is liquid, it could be fat, which is storage, so a lot of different types. So if it's not epithelial, muscles or nerves, it's connective tissue. Muscles. We have 3 types of muscles. So the first type is under our control. So the only type of muscle we can control are these skeletal muscles. The ones connected to the bones, and we use them for movement. They're striated because under the microscope you can actually see the bands, the regular dark and light lines. And muscle is actually a mechanical device. So muscles actually ratchet when they flex and when they relax. Takes some energy, takes a lot of ATP energy. Next is visceral. Anytime you hear the word visceral, think of your organs. All of your internal organs are going to be smooth muscle, and involuntary. So you cannot control your GI tract, for example. So as long as food is in your stomach, after that, it's pretty much under the control of your involuntary nervous system. And lastly is cardiac. So cardi means heart. So similar to skeletal muscle, it's also striated. The only difference is it has intercalated discs. And those are just special gap junctions. When we get to the muscles chapter in week 3, we'll cover that in more depth. Can you control your heart? Normally you can't, but there are certain tricks called biofeedback. Things you can do to lower your respiratory rate. Right? For example, chew. Right? So this is a trick, because the only time you can eat is when it's safe to eat. So if you want to calm yourself down, chew. Right? Or exhale slowly. That'll slow your respiratory rate. Normally, we can't control it outright. Stop. Go ahead. Keep on. Right? Can't control the heart. Lastly, nervous tissue. So easy: brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. So these two are part of your central nervous system, and then that means everything else is your peripheral nervous system. So brain and spinal cord, they interpret data. Right? Peripheral nerves, they just send data to the brain. How does the body make electricity? Yeah. E-L-E-C-T-R-O-L-1. What are electrolytes?
Salt.
Salts with a charge on them. So sodium, potassium, chloride, right? So if it has a charge and we move it about, we make electricity. Right? So your nervous system has to control sodium and potassium in order to fire. So in week 4, we'll talk about the nervous system. Neurons, neuroglia, right? Neuroglia. So we have the actual neurons. These are your nerve cells, right? So they'll detect stuff and then they'll fire down their tail, right? But you have helper cells. So for every one neuron, you got about 10 helper cells supporting it. So these guys continue to divide. The neurons, not so much. You ever heard that you only get so many brain cells, they don't divide? Well, that's not true, not entirely true. There are only some parts of the brain that can regenerate and continue to divide. So we'll put in here some. Some can still divide. All right, the organs. So 2 or more organs of doing the same thing, that's going to be your organ system. So 2 or more tissue types will make your organ. So here's an example of the respiratory system. They'll just talk about all the different parts, which is pretty much an organ. So we have the nose. So nase, that's the word root for nose. Nasal cavity, so that will heat up and moisten the air. The throat, so pharynx, the common term is throat. Trachea, that's the windpipe. Larynx, when you have laryngitis, what happens? Voice box, right? You lose your voice, so that's your voice box. Trachea, windpipe. Pharynx, your throat. Your bronchi, those are the branches, so you have 2 of them. So if you have BRONCHUS, That's just one. That's singular. Plural form of US ending is an I. Think of fungus. Plural form, fungi. So those are the two branches. So your windpipe here, and then they branch off. And then you have your two bellows, which are the lungs. And that's where you exchange the gases. Bellows, yeah. It just means like a sack. All right, medical terminology, word root. So that's the basic meaning. Every medical term needs at least a word root and a suffix. So that's bare minimum, word root, suffix. So suffix go at the end of the word, and of course prefix go at the beginning, and they just alter them. So at minimum you need a word root and a suffix. In order to make pronunciation easier, after the word root they'll add an O. So combining vowels, and there are certain rules for medical terminology. For example, you never use a combining vowel when you use a prefix. Right? So never add an O after a prefix. You only use an O after a word root if the suffix starts with a consonant. Right? So if the suffix starts with a consonant, you need the O. If the suffix already starts with a vowel, then you don't need the O. Right? That's very important. So basic rules. Word root, add an O. If the suffix ends in a consonant, don't add an O if the suffix already starts with a vowel. That's pretty much it for medical terminology. We'll quickly go through the directional terms, and then we'll take a break and finish up the rest of the chapter. All right, stand up, everybody, and get in anatomical position. All right, what is anatomical position? Body is standing upright, facing forward, arms to the side, and palms facing forward. All right, so you're going to assume that every picture you see is in this position unless otherwise stated. All right, now flex every muscle you got. Go. Go, flex. Make every angle in your whole body smaller.
Difficult right now.
Right, so this is starting position. When things are completely flexed, everything, all the bones and the muscles. So you curl up, your head goes down, and you're up on your toes.
I figured that.
So that's completely flexed. You guys don't have to do it. But if you want to, step in the hole. You're going to assume everything is in anatomical position. So this is the right side. This is the left side. Right? So the left side of the heart is going to be a lot bigger than the right side. Superior, inferior, toward the head, toward the feet. So cranial towards the head, caudal towards the feet. So another word for towards the feet is caudal. Anterior, front. Posterior, back. Where is the dorsal fin on a shark? Right? That's the dorsal fin, the one that's on its back. Okay? Ventral, that's where all of our visceral is. That's where all our organs are. Medial, towards the midline of the body. Right? Lateral, towards the outside. Your thigh muscle is your vatus lateralis because it's the most lateral muscle towards the outside. Medial, towards the midline. Proximal and distal only um, refers to the arms and legs. So proximal is closer, distal is farther away. So your fingers are distal compared to the elbow. The elbow is more proximal. So that only has to do with the arms and legs, the appendages. Superficial, right? That's skin deep. And then towards the surface, and then deep is a lot deeper, down to the muscle, down to the bone. Learn them in tandem. Hopefully that'll make it easier for you guys. Get your flashcards if you need to. Here it is pictorially. So superior towards the head, caudal, inferior towards the feet, medial towards the midline, lateral, outwards. So here's the vatus lateralis, the outer thigh. Proximal and distal, so it only deals with legs and arms. So here, the upper thigh is closer than the lower thigh. Right? Proximal part, closer to the midline, farther away. Anterior towards the front, the dorsal fin is on the back side. Superficial, skin deep, and then deep past that. Might be down to the muscle, all the way down to the bone. Planes of the body. If we were to make slices in the body, there's three main planes. So the first one is left and right. So if I make left and right, that is the sagittal plane. If I make equal, and the key term here is equal left and right, then that is mid-sagittal. Left and right, sagittal, left and right portions. If I make a upper and a lower portion, a top portion and a bottom portion, then that is transverse. The easiest one, if I make front and back, that's easy because that is the frontal plane. I make a front half and I make a back half, right? I cut the body this way. This is also called the coronal plane because when you put a coronation on, put somebody's crown on, you cut them in front half and back half. Get your coronation. So they also call that the coronal plane. Front of the body, back of the body. No, won't have time for this. So major, if you hear the word major cavity, there's only two, right? There's the dorsal and ventral, that's it. Dorsal and ventral. If you hear the word major cavities of the body. So the first major cavity is the dorsal cavity, so the back side. And there's only two. So this one's the easier one. One, where the brain is. Two, where the spinal cord is. So 1 and 2, that's it. That is the dorsal cavity. Contains the brain, contains the spinal cord. The other major cavity, so if dorsal is the first major cavity, the other major cavity is the ventral cavity. Now this one's a little more complex. So it's physically divided by the diaphragm. So this is the muscle of breathing, and it divides the thoracic cavity from the abdominal pelvic cavity. So the abdominal pelvic cavity, this right here is not a physical barrier. The diaphragm is. So anything where the hip bone is, they call that the pelvic cavity, and then the abdominal cavity. But there is no physical barrier there. So we have the thoracic, diaphragm, and then abdominal pelvic. Where the hip region is, they just call it the pelvic cavity. Major cavities, dorsal ventral, and then within those major cavities, you'll have the divisions. All right, so the thoracic cavity, so above the diaphragm. Of course, those organs, lungs, heart, esophagus, trachea. And then you have the diaphragm, which is smooth muscle. Can you control your breathing? Yes. How do you control your breathing when you sleep? All right, so it's involuntary. It's a smooth muscle. All right, the abdominal pelvic region is commonly divided into quadrants. How many in a quad? Anytime you hear quad, all right, 4 quadrants. And it's also divided into regions. When you say regions, it's going to be 9 regions. So the quads are easy. You want to say upper or lower first, right? Upper or lower. And then you want to say left or right. So which side is this? Dun 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 dun. You're gonna where the X is. Which side is this?
That's the
anatomical position.
upper right.
So that's gonna be right. So upper right. No, sorry, I messed up. Right upper quadrant, and then right lower quadrant. There you go. So you want to say left or right first? Yeah, you want to say left or right. So this side is the left side, so this is going to be the left upper quadrant. And then this would be the left lower quadrant. Right? So say left or right first, then upper or lower. The regions, the 9 regions. And this is the one that gets hard. In the middle is where your umbilical cord is. So they call that the umbilical region. Easy enough. Epi, and your stomach is gaster. So above your stomach is the epigastric. So the term for above is epi. The term for below is hypo. So this would be the hypogastric region. Right. Lower back is lumbar. So you have your right lumbar and left lumbar, right? Next is the lower region where your hip pointers are. That's called your iliac region. So your iliac crest is your hip pointers. Also called the inguinal region. So this would be the right inguinal region. And this would be the left inguinal region. Lastly, where your ribs are, right here, is where all the cartilage is. The term for cartilage is chondro. So below the cartilage is hypochondriatic. So you have your right hypochondriatic region and your left hypochondriatic region. So to review, your umbilical region in the center, above the stomach, epigastric, below the stomach, hypogastric, right lumbar, lower back, left lumbar, right inguinal, aka right iliac, and then your left inguinal, left iliac region, right hypochondriatic for below the cartilage, and left hypochondriatic for below the cartilage. So quads, 4. Regions, 9. So when you're charting, you'll need to identify which region or which quadrant the problem is in. Chemistry. So we'll keep it basic. all you got to know is for us, the bonding has to do with the electrons. Right? So you got protons and neutrons in the center, and whizzing around are all the electrons. So that's the basic model. Metabolism. Ana means to bring together. Kata means to break down. So when you take anabolic steroids, it's going to help build. So things that you eat, things that you take in, you're going to use those to build. But before you can use them, you got to break them down. So digesting them, break them down. Catabolism. Building them back up into your own constituents. Anabolism. The overall process of breaking down and building up is meta. So meta means like the whole entire thing. Electrolytes. So ions have an uneven charge. So it may have a positive charge. We'll call that a cation. Or it might have a negative charge. We'll call that an anion. So when you take salt, sodium, and put it in water, it splits apart into sodium plus and chloride negative. So important for us when you're dehydrated, it's not only the water you lose, but also the salts. So Gatorade contains water and salt to rehydrate you quicker. Acids and base. So the pH scale measures how acidic something is, and it ranges from 0 to 14. The low number is acid. High number is base. So that means straight in the middle, 7 is going to be neutral. So if I'm an acid, I'm going to release H+. That is hydrogen ions. So anytime you see H+, think acid. Hydroxyl ions, that's base. That's OH-. So you can see what happens when we have an acid and we combined it with the base. What do we get? How many H's? How many O's? Oh, there you go. What's the charge on H2O? Nothing, right? Because you have a plus and a negative. When they combine, they cancel each other out. So if you take an acid, you take a base, you combine them, they neutralize each other. So low pH, acid. High pH, base. Biochemistry. So bio is life. Chemistry, so the study of life and chemistry. Organic, usually from living, and it's mostly carbon and hydrogen bonds. 4 classes, so they're talking about stuff that makes DNA, stuff that makes protein, carbs, and fats. Right? So those are going to be pretty much the organic. Outside of that, usually from non-living stuff, non-carbon hydrogen bonds, that's going to be inorganic. So think of organic, vitamins, and then inorganic, minerals. Minerals, they don't come from living stuff, but vitamins, we get them from plants and animals we eat. All right, the first, carbohydrate. So carbo is a C connected to a hydrate, which is an H. So this is that organic type molecule. So all sugars are going to end in OSE. So a carbohydrate is just a bunch of sugars connected together. So a complex carb is just multiple sugars together. Simple sugar is just one sugar by itself. The next are our fats. So when you say lipids, you can just think of fats. We have triglycerides. So a triglyceride is a glyceride that can carry up to 3 fatty acids. If it's only one, then it's on monoglyceride. If there's 2, it'll be a diglyceride. And if it has all 3 fatty acids, then it is a triglyceride. Phospholipids are important for cell membrane. They have a phosphate head that loves water, and then they have a fatty acid tail that hates water. So in the cell lecture, you'll see how that arranges into making a cell membrane. And lastly, steroids. Steroids are cholesterol-based fats. And a lot of your hormones are cholesterol-based, like estrogen and testosterone. Those are cholesterol-based hormones. Next is protein. The building blocks of proteins are amino acids. You have about 20 different amino acids, and depending on which ones are linked together will determine its shape and hence its function. So enzymes usually end in ASE. Sugar ends in OSE. Enzymes, they end in ASE. Proteins also make your antibodies for your immune system. And then the last class, nucleic acid. DNA, RNA. So the only difference is the sugar. So DNA is deoxyribose nucleic acid, and then RNA is ribonucleic acid. So DNA is inside the nucleus. If it needs to go outside, we have to transcribe it into RNA. So DNA inside the nucleus, we make a copy to take it outside, and now it's RNA. From the RNA, we make our proteins. So that's how the instructions work in your body. Every cell has its own DNA. Right, the cell. We'll go over the organelles and its basic structure. So the most important thing is the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is that phospholipid bilayer. So it's pretty much a lipid layer. And what it does is it keeps water on the inside and it keeps water on the outside, because that fat layer will repel any of that water. So it makes that firm border, what's inside and what's out. Holding all of the organelles, the organs of the cells together, is the cytoplasm. So it just looks like just regular jelly soup, but there's actually a lot of structure because it needs to move things in and out of the cell. The nucleus, so that's also a membrane-bound organelle, and that's where all the DNA is. So very important structure. It controls what goes in and out of the cell. In the tissue slide, I mentioned those cells, the epithelial cells that might line the airway, the respiratory tract. So they have little hairs. So that can be for movement or for the brush-like tops that sweep the mucus up and out of the respiratory tract. Flagellum, just like sperm, whip-like tail used for locomotion. Ribosomes, this is where protein is made. So the RNA is read on ribosomes, and then the protein is made from that instructions. The ER, think of it as packaging and shipping. So this is like the FedEx center. So once product is made, you need to package it and ship it out to where it needs to go. Mitochondria, that's the powerhouse. That's where sugar is burnt with oxygen to create our energy molecule. So in the body, the energy molecule is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Then we have the Golgi apparatus. Sorry, I think I messed up here. Golgi apparatus is the FedEx center. The ER, this is where things are made. So this is the machinery, the manufacturing plant of the cell is the ER. You have two types. You have smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum. So the smooth stuff makes fats, and the rough stuff contains ribosomes. So of course they'll make proteins. Lysosomes, these are digestive sacs or sacs of digested enzymes. So when the cell takes in nutrients, it needs to break them down. It'll merge these vacuoles and digest the contents. Centrioles is involved in cell division. You'll only see the chromosomes thick during cell division. Most of the time they're very thin and spread out. You can't even see them under the microscope. It's only during mitosis or cell division that you'll actually see the thick chromosomes. Movement through the semi-permeable membrane, so selectively permeable. So remember, it's mostly fats. So things that are made out of fats can sometimes wiggle through because like dissolves like. But if you're made out of water, you're most likely going to be repelled. So already there's one way of selectively allowing things to go in and out. Things move from high concentration to low. For example, is air freshener. If someone sprayed air freshener at the front of the room, right, we don't have to do anything. In a few minutes, everyone, including those in the back of the room, will smell it. Right? We didn't have to put any energy in it at all. High concentration at the front of the room where we sprayed it, and then it just passively diffuses to low concentration. The opposite, when we go from low concentration to high, it's usually going to require some type of energy. So for our air freshener, we found out that somebody was allergic. So we designated somebody to run around the room and collect all the air freshener and stuff it back into the can or the bottle. Right? That's going to take a tremendous amount of energy, going from low, spread out throughout the classroom, and then putting it back in the bottle. So one is just simple diffusion, going from high to low concentration, no energy involved at all. Osmosis has to do with water. So sometimes water pressure is called osmotic pressure. So water can probably go in and out of the membrane, but the solutes, the things dissolved in the water, cannot. Filtration has to do with pressure. So the way your kidneys filter is through blood pressure. High blood pressure. Anything that leaks out through the glomerulus will be collected and become the urine. And lastly, active transport, going from low to high, requiring energy. So those are ways to go through the cell membrane, which is a phospholipid bilayer. Two types of cell division. So the first type will reserve the chromosome count. So every cell in your body has 46 chromosomes. Before your cells can divide, they'll need to copy its DNA. So it'll make a complete copy, 46 times 2, which is 92. And then as it goes through mitosis, the chromosome number is reserved. So for example, this is your skin cell. So when your skin needs to replace dead cells, then it just makes a copy of its DNA and then it divides, right? So I have to copy the DNA first. The chromosome number is reserved. In the case of meiosis, the chromosome number is going to be cut into half. Right? So it's an additional step where you'll get now 23 chromosomes. Oops, 23. So any sperm or egg will have 23 each. So the union of the sperm, 23, and the egg will give you your complete chromosome count, 46. Half from your mom, half from your dad. When the cell is not dividing, then it's interphase. So it's interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. So those are the stages of mitosis. So I just use the acronym PRO-MAT to remember. Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. And then when the two cells divide and become two daughter cells, that's called cytokinesis. All right, the stages. So prophase, this is when you will start to see the nuclear envelope dissolve, and you'll start to see the chromosomes condense. So here that nucleus starts to break down and the chromosomes condense. Okay? That's prophase. Metaphase is easy because all of the chromosomes, they line up in the middle. M for middle, all the chromosomes are at the middle. Okay? So once they're copied, they condense, they line up at the middle. In anaphase, the chromosomes are separated and they're split apart. So they're going to go to separate sides. And lastly, in telophase, you get the two new cells start to form. So the cell membrane will start to form in between, and then you'll start to get the two nuclei start to form. Meiosis, remember, we don't conserve the 46 chromosome. We're going to go down to 23. So when the sperm and the egg reunites, you'll get your complete chromosome set back, 46, forming that zygote. Genetic techniques. So reading DNA is easy. Right? If you know one side of the strand, you know the other. A always connects with T. C always connects with G. So that means if this is a T, this has to be an A. This is a G, it has to be a. In RNA, it's just one substitution. So it's only one different base. We use uracil. So a gene. A gene is one set of information. It's like one computer program, but it needs to be turned on and off in the body. So we have hundreds, thousands of genes, and what makes us us is when the genes are turned on and how much of the gene is turned on. So most of our genes are the same, and a lot of what we get from our parents isn't really the genes, it's what's called epigenetics. And that means not only what genes your parents give you, what genes get turned on and when. Your parents also pass down as well. And down the generation. So what your grandparents done will also affect you as well. Not your genetics, but your epigenetics. What gets turned on. So today, they're manipulating gene techniques. They're able to pretty much give you a designer child. There is the CRISPR method, and there's also adult genetic engineering. So even if you have a disease, they can change your genetic makeup as an adult. Not just as a kid, not just cloning. Pretty crazy stuff. PCR, polymerase chain reaction. So this is the enzyme that copies DNA. So if you only have a little piece of DNA, like let's say at a crime scene, and you need to make tons and tons of it to study, then all you do is put it through the PCR. It takes a piece of DNA, it splits it into two, right? Once you get two, now you can copy it. Now you have two pieces that are complete. You're going to now split it into four. Now that you have single DNA, you can copy that and rinse and repeat. So that's how you're able to magnify the copies of DNA. So you'll take now the copied DNA and you can sequence it. So that's the fingerprinting of the DNA. And Angelina Jolie, what did she remove? And why? What else? And why? So she removed her breasts, mastectomy, and her uterus, hysterectomy, because she had the genes in her family. So I think relatives in her family had breast cancer as well, and she had the genes, so she just did preventative. But there are treatment now where if you have breast cancer or certain cancers, we can knock that gene out. We can turn that gene off, and then you don't get cancer. So that's the future. Actually, that's kind of like the present right now. Here's an example of DNA sequencing, and this is all done based on weight. So how heavy the DNA fragment is will determine how far it falls down on this little track. And then based on that, you can read it. A, T, G, C, A, G, T, C, G, T, C. And based on that sequence, you know what gene that is. So they take a little bit of DNA, they magnify it, and then they put it on the gel, and now they can sequence your exact DNA. It used to be millions and millions of dollars, years and years and years. Now, what do? 23andMe, right? So it just, now it's like a couple $100, takes a couple weeks to a month to do, just get a saliva sample. So that was just about 30 years ago. It used to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to sequence DNA. Now we do it for a couple $100. They will not tell you what genes you have. They will tell you like basic stuff, but they'll just give you the letters. You're gonna have to find the gene and then see if you have it. They don't want to scare people because everyone has cancer genes. It's just when they're turned on. So not only are your genes transferred, your physical genes, but it's the epigenetics that's mostly important. When and how much of that gene is turned on will determine pretty much your evolution. So for example, monkeys, humans, right? Monkeys, their face will still elongate. So pretty much humans, we stop developing. So for us, our epigenetics tell our face stop elongating, and then we have smaller shape heads. Right? So that's an example of the epigenetics. Are your earlobes attached or are they unattached? Unattached, attached. So which one's dominant? Which one's recessive? So you guys know the difference? Yeah, attached is recessive. So dominant over recessive. So if you get one gene from a parent, one from the other, one is dominant, one is recessive, then the dominant one will physically come about. Right? It's kind of like masking. The dominant gene will mask it. For example, blood type. If you have AO, then your blood type will be A. If you have BO genes, your blood type will be B. If you have OO, that's the only way you get O blood. But our blood type has an additional dominance. There's co-dominance. So if you have AB, A from mom, B from dad, your blood will be AB. They're equally as strong. So in this case, O is recessive. AB is co-dominant over O. Hair, a lot of traits, eye color can be drawn down to this. But then there's also sex-linked genes, like male pattern baldness. So how do you guys know if your kids will be bald or not? It's yourself? No, it skips a generation. So you're gonna have to add, it's on the mom side because it's sex-linked. So, is your dad bald? Good, your son will have hair. Is your dad bald? Yes. Is your dad bald? No. So it's on the woman's side. If the wife's father's bald, then the grandson will be bald. So it's all your fault, ladies. Giving your son baldness. And hemophilia. So if you give your son hemophilia, color blindness, those are all sex-linked traits.
But what if there's like two sons from the same mother and one is and one isn't?
Oh yeah, it depends on the genes. So it could be recessive dominant in that case. So ever heard of?
My brother, I mean, I shave my head. It's a little light, but I still shave it. And
Yeah.
my brother's got that whole, like, his forehead starts in the back of his neck.
Oh yeah. So when the genes are turned on. So for you, the genes haven't turned on. The bald gene hasn't turned on. For him, that DHT is already up and
He's like,
producing. Yeah. So epigenetics. Not what genes you have, but when and how much of it is turned on. So that's how you can have a range of skin color of the children, a range of hair color and eye color. A genetic defect, no pigmentation, albinism. If you're albino, do not go to Africa. They use your body parts for witchcraft. They think that albinos have special powers, and if you die, they have to like bury your body in cement or it'll be stolen because they use the bodies for witchcraft. Pretty crazy stuff. All it is no pigments. So red eyes, no skin.
yeah, they do it in
Pigmented.
Haiti also.
Cystic fibrosis. So here you create very, very thick mucus. And if it's in your lungs, you can't breathe. If it's in your GI tract, you can't absorb nutrients. Trisomial 21. So here you have 3 copies of chromosome 21. That means you have a total of 47 chromosomes. So during meiosis, those pairs of chromosomes didn't divide. And one of them stuck together, and now you have 3 copies of chromosome 21. If you have other trisomal chromosome pairs, then it's different types of Down syndrome. So another type is mosaic. Have you heard of that? It's just a different pair. Fragile X, so very similar. Hemophilia is an example of a sex-linked trait. So next to baldness and color blindness, women, you can also kill your son with hemophilia. So there are 13 different clotting factors that you need to make a clot. So in hemophilia, it's one of those that are bad. So it's usually factor 8 or 9. Those are the common hemophilia traits. We'll skip that. We'll do PKU. So your inability to break down phenylalanine into the protein tyrosine. So this is an enzyme problem. So people with PKU, phenylketonuria, should avoid NutraSweet because they'll build up and become toxic in their body. So keto, your blood becomes acidic, go into a coma, and then you die. All right, not too bad. I'm going to open up the in-class for you guys. So you have to look at the skin chapter.